Preparation of tax returns in Assistant. The main screen of Assistant displays the client list that you can use to find the appropriate client. If you want to create a tax return for a client who has not yet been registered in Assistant, press the New button and choose the type of tax return. If you complete the cover page and save the return, Assistant will create the client's record with details from the cover page of the return and will then attach the return to the newly created client's record. If you wish to create a new client record without creating a tax return, click on the Clients button and use it to create a new record. The New Record button on the left will start a new record. This is where you complete the relevant fields in the Client Details form. To open an existing return or start a new tax return for the client, select the tax year from the pick list on the top right corner of the main screen. You can also open the tax return by double-clicking on the client or by clicking on the Open button on the button panel. Any of these methods will open an existing return or start a new tax return for the selected client in the selected year. If you start a new tax return for the selected client, Assistant will check if the previous year's tax return exists. If it does exist, Assistant will use its data to pre-populate the new tax return. Data such as asset depreciation details, worksheets, schedules and action codes will be transferred from the previous year's tax return. The dollar amounts will not be transferred to avoid mistakes. In this particular example, the return has been created already and you can see the record in the client's folder. Therefore, Assistant just opened the return without rolling the data from the previous year. Let's have a look at another client who doesn't have a tax return created in the selected tax year. Mr. Smith does not have a tax return created for him in the 2011 tax year, but has a tax return created in 2010. If you double-click on the selected record, Assistant will start the 2011 tax return for Mr. Smith and roll the data from his 2010 year tax return. As you can see, salary or wages, gross interest, and dividends worksheets were transferred from the 2010 tax return so they can be reused in the 2011 tax return. Further in the tax return, there is a rental schedule which has been rolled over from the 2010 tax return with all the amount fields cleared during the rollover. Agent details such as reference number, contact name and contact number from the Assistant options will be used to automatically populate the agent details fields when creating a new tax return. The data entry forms in Assistant look and feel like ATO pre-printed forms. Navigation through the tax return is very simple. Use the page tabs on the top of the form to select the appropriate page. Use the scroll bar or mouse wheel to move the page up and down, or double-click the item on the navigator to access the appropriate item. You can also get to the required item using the Go to Item shortcut. This will move the cursor to the navigator's tree. Enter the item number and hit the Enter key. If I press 21 and hit Enter, the program will bring the focus to item 21, Rent. The navigator highlights the item you're currently editing. The check sign on the folder image in the navigator will indicate the corresponding item is completed. The navigator can also be used to open the schedules in the tax return. Schedules are always listed at the end of the item list as paperclip icons. The schedules can also be activated via the New button pop-up menu. Most of the items on the tax return are linked to worksheets that can be activated by clicking on the underlined item title. If you complete the worksheet, the corresponding tax return item will be displayed in red to indicate a supporting worksheet. Unless you delete the item, further editing of the item will be allowed only by editing of the worksheet. Some of the items in the tax returns can only be completed by filling in the associated worksheet. For example, item 9, attributed personal service income, has all data fields disabled. The only way to complete those items is by completing the associated worksheets. Some of the fields in the tax return, such as type fields, action code fields, occupation code, etc., have a pick list of valid values. If you select one of these fields, the pick list button will appear next to the field. Clicking on the button will activate the pick list. You can also use the F4 function key to activate the pick list. The Enter key or double-clicking on the item in the pick list will select the value in the pick list. The Escape key will close the pick list without selecting any value. Clicking the F1 key in the tax return will display the help topic with relevant information from the tax pack or tax return instructions for the highlighted item. While working in the tax return, you can preview the tax estimate page. The on-screen estimation updates automatically as you complete each item in the tax return. For instance, changing the salary and wages figures will force the estimate window to update. Click on the Print Details button to view the details of the tax calculation. The first page will show the summary of the tax estimate. Other pages will show the audit trail with workings for each figure on the tax estimate summary page. The individual tax return form in Assistant has an additional page which is not part of the pre-printed form from the tax office. The completion of this page provides additional information for the tax calculation. For example, averaging information or HEX accumulated debts and the Student Financial Supplementary Scheme and payee tax paid. All this additional information will help to correctly calculate the tax on the taxpayer's taxable income. This page also has the option to activate the work-related expenses schedule. This schedule will be sent to the ATO only if the work-related expenses checkbox has been checked on the other page of the individual tax return. To mark the checkbox or question field in Assistant, you have to double-click on the field or press one of the following keys: the spacebar, the X key, the Y key, or the N key. Repeatedly clicking on the checkbox will rotate the states of the checkbox. The tax return preparation in Assistant is as simple as filling in the tax return fields, completing the worksheets, and where required, the schedules. However, after having completed the tax return, you will usually face the challenge of eliminating logical errors in the tax return. Only returns which have passed validation tests can be finalised and lodged to the tax office. By clicking the Validate button, we will force Assistant to check the tax return for any logical errors. Mr. Smith is a male, and by changing his sex to female, we will create a logical error mismatching his title with his sex. If we validate the return again, the error will be detected. By double-clicking the error in the validation listing, the software will access the offending schedule and highlight the incorrect field, allowing you to easily correct the error. Some logical errors are very complex, and the field which has triggered the error may not necessarily be the field to be fixed. In order to work out the reason for the error, you have to produce a validation report for the error by clicking on the Print Error Report button. This button is located on the left-hand side of the error list. The detailed report indicates the actual error code consistent with the tax office error reports, provides a detailed explanation of the error, shows the actual validation test that triggered the error, repeats the test with values substituted from the tax return, and finally, lists all the fields involved in the validation with their location, description, and values in the tax return. Most of the time, the extended explanation in the error report is sufficient to understand the cause of the error. The more complicated errors would require you to examine the validation test and determine which field or fields in the tax return require adjustments. From this particular test, you can see that the taxpayer's title is in the list of female titles, and the sex is F, which stands for female, and not the expected M, which stands for male. This is why the error has been triggered. A validation report such as this is very helpful and will dramatically reduce the time spent completing tax returns, with no time wasted guessing the cause of the error or having to contact us to evaluate the cause and the fix. Most validation errors can be double-clicked on and will take you to the offending item or worksheet. The status of the return can be set in the status form. You can set the status to one available in this list. You will not be able to change the status of the return to prepared or signed if there is at least one error in the return. The status form can also be used to write some notes for the return or specify the lodgement due date. If you set a due date, you can then filter the clients with returns due for lodgement. The signed status will mark the return to be collected by the Electronic Lodgement System, or ELS. However, before you lodge the return, you have to print it for your client to sign.